Hello, this is Michael Hexter. Welcome to my Politics 2100 video cast here on YouTube. Today's episode, or the episode I'm recording right now, I'm calling Progressives, Government Leaders, Government Leaders must transcend the Talion law or we face barbarism. So this is a follow-up to the last episode, which was about the knee-jerk, the cycle of action and reaction by that the right wing is trying to establish as the norm in contemporary politics and also in government, and I would argue also generalized in society at large. So. This is this cycle of action, reaction, of knee-jerk. What I'm calling it knee-jerk. It's something that comes from in that which I talked about in the last video about is keeping people on the lower end of their evolutionary abilities in terms of their brain and nervous system and so forth and so on, keeping it at the reptilian level or the lower mammalian level in terms of their ability to think, ability to take a step back and reason and try to figure things out for themselves and figure things out then in general in a discussion in a democracy, in a society overall. And so the right wing is trying to constantly push people, and that's what I argued in that video, to regress or to go back in time, to de-evolve, to do devolution of their own personal, in terms of their own personality, their own abilities to think. And I then reviewed some psychoanalytic ideas about what keeps people stuck, okay, or even not only stuck, but even regressing more toward a less adult, a less mature, a less able person to think about and then make decisions about society, about even one's own life. But in particular, I'm talking about politics and political decision making. So anyway, in this episode, I am going to be focusing on a very, very specific idea by a psychoanalytic, theorist, actually, who moved to Argentina from Europe. I think he was born in Poland, and his name is Heinrich Racker, or Racker, okay, Racker, and he. Unfortunately, he died quite young in 1961, in his early 50s, but he, in his brief career, came up with some very interesting ideas about what was curative in psychoanalysis, and by extension, we could say also in psychotherapy, because he was an object relations theorist. And anyway, he had this idea that that people's interactions with other people are governed often, especially if people are in a neurosis or in a maladaptive pattern that's rigid and fixed. So this is this is taking what I was talking about in the other video, the repetition compulsion, and trying to make it actually a little bit more realistic in some ways or another. That it's not simply some sort of inner drive, but that people create a social world around them which reinforces patterns that they've learned from early on, maybe that they that suit some maladaptive feelings or patterns or desire to remain a certain way that is familiar to them, but nevertheless is hurting them, maybe hurting other people around them, and they are in some pain, and they're, in this case, the people you would find who would be willing to undergo some kind of psychological treatment, and particularly a psychoanalysis, which is rather involved and long usually. So anyway, but the idea, so taking it out of this context of the small set of people who do that kind of work, and also the people who seek it out to get help. I think in that theory is a more general idea about how in a society and more in a that people get stuck, that there become cycles, what I talked about, vicious cycles of action and reaction, that people are seeking basically a similar react, that they see someone getting angry or criticizing them, and they criticize them back in the same way, and the cycle keeps going. And my theory and my observation in terms of how our contemporary politics works is that the right wing is particularly good at creating these cycles that involve very low end or lower end of our own evolutionary ability to think and to feel, and the very most primitive basic emotions, that they're able to keep people, relatively speaking, at those levels, especially as regards politics and political discourse. They will invent controversy, invent a world, essentially, with the help of propaganda, with the help of media, invent a world where this seems like the only choice that people have. The only choice is to react, and then eventually it becomes about violence, and their preference for violence is, in a way, stems from this very reduced view and reduced way they create people's world, in some sense. Creating, I'm not saying they create the whole world, but it's this word I want to show you is projective identification, is that because they have captured certain media apparatus, or they've created them, that they're rich people who want the right wing to succeed, and they've endowed, or they've made it easy for them to have by donating money and so forth, someone have fairly loud voices and loud transmissions of their ideas that are spread throughout society, even though they complain about the opposite, that they're in fact censored, and that they are the victims of a massive conspiracy in the media, that in fact it's relative to their numbers and relative to the popularity of their ideas, they have a very large platform. And furthermore, the mainstream media complies, and they take seriously the mostly ludicrous wails of persecution and of censorship that they WAILS wail, they're wailing of about their feeling persecuted and excluded. Anyway, so they have this apparatus that calls on people. So projective identification is about a I don't want to use the fancy word. There's a word called interpolation. Anyway, but it when you use a certain discourse, it draws out feelings in people, and the people respond to that discourse, even though they are not present. In other words, the other person they're seeing it on TV, and the words are stimulating the people. In other words, most Trump supporters have never seen Trump in person. I'm using Trump as an example. There are other examples of this megaphone, or this bullhorn of this constant flood of images and of discourse that is supporting this particular way of thinking, this reduced, reactive, angry, racist also, and xenophobic worldview, and these media organizations constantly massage and keep people in a state where they are believing that they themselves, even though they're relatively privileged, not ultimately privileged, but relatively privileged and relatively well-to-do, or not necessarily very comfortable, but still they are made to feel like the most persecuted and the most put upon, and therefore, and also deceived, that they have been deceived not by the people who are currently deceiving them, but by the opponents of them. So in other words, and to make them feel like any reaction by them, any they should do anything, for instance, and the people, their opponents, this is where it gets into psychotic level views, that their opponents are, drinking the blood of children, and are, doing monstrous things that are invented by various, they're called conspiracy theorists, whatever, people who are misleading people who are in this state of being I've called it, paranoid schizoid. Is the paranoid schizoid position is another way to think about it, also from object relations psychoanalysis. But anyway, so I've got to get back to Heinrich Racker, who I just introduced to you a minute ago, or a few minutes ago. So anyway, Racker was very interested in what's called countertransference as a part of psychotherapy. And countertransference is the feelings of the therapist or analyst and how they influence then the treatment of, and that there's the transference, which is what the patient brings to the therapy, and then the countertransference is how the supposed to be a pure, relatively unbiased, but it's always biased by whoever the therapist is or the analyst is, but it's still supposed to say something. The countertransference is supposed to have, at least, especially in the object relations school, it's supposed to have some information about what is happening in the world of the patient, that there are things that the patient is sending out that they don't want to feel themselves, but that other people feel, that may be related to how they feel or how their relationships have worked in the current state or in the past, wherever they are, so that this is kind of a complementarity. It's about complementarity between one person having a relationship with another person. And so, and this complementarity is very key to understanding almost any relationship, whether you want to use a psychoanalytic view of it or not. And so, anyway, so in his interest in that, he talks about something called the Talion law. Okay, so the Talion law is visually from the Bible. It's about an eye for an eye. So it's actually a principle of justice. It's a principle it's even a legal principle in terms of punishment, in terms of, in other words, that if someone does something in society, that they should repay society in some form or other. So that it should be equal, like for like. It's not it shouldn't really be the universal principle of the justice system. It needs to be elaborated. It needs to be softened. It needs to be modified. It can't be entirely lifted and totally. That there is an element to which people, in order to be responsible for what they do, they need to understand the damage of what they do, and then they need to do some kind of repayment for that damage, or some kind of atonement. They need to change their ability, change their propensity to do that kind of thing, so that they won't do that kind of damage. That kind of, if they're found to have done that damage. In other words, if the legal process has, accurately and successfully determined that this person is responsible for some kind of a crime, or a damage, some kind of a damage, not necessarily a crime, but a tort or whatever. So anyway, the Talion law is, but he wanted to use it not in the legal sense, but more in the sense of in psychology, is that a neurotic person, or a person who's stuck in a certain way of living, is constantly acting and reacting, and they're stuck because the responses they're getting are following this principle. In other words, most of the time when someone, when you yell at someone, for instance, they will yell back at you, or often. So it's like, so you'll get it coming back to you, and you and then you will yell at them again. So there'd be a cycle of yelling. I'm using that as one example. It's a very crude example of this Talion law idea. But anyway, so people will be responding in kind to each other, and as a form of response. And so this is a tit for tat that is a basic principle of interacting, of people interacting, of game. Also, there's game theory talks about tit for tat, and so there's all kinds of way in which the complementarity or the relationship between people who are doing any number of different things with each other, not necessarily negative, okay, so it could be a positive like for like. In other words, you give something to someone and they give something back to you. So it's a form of reciprocity. Okay, so tit for tat is what's called balanced reciprocity in anthropology or in economic anthropology. So anyway, so this Talion law of in psychology or in the mind, or in the mind of someone who is struggling and who is unhappy, it traps them in a cycle of acting, reacting that they don't get out of unless they're able to have an experience, maybe with a therapist, maybe some other experience, maybe just growing up, maybe just having a better relationship with some person, or having maybe a new context, a new work, a new love relationship. So, but anyway, so this. But if it does come to it, certainly the therapists and psychoanalysts, if the people who are really in enough pain to go through that process, they should be able to modify and respond to the demands of the patient, in a way that doesn't reinforce that tit for tat, that doesn't keep them stuck, that allows them to grow and allows them to change, and allows them to explore, and allows them to understand that maybe to stop the destructive, maybe aggressive, for instance, actions that they were doing, and or maybe other or self-defeating things that they were doing that were calling other people, then you can even incite other people sometimes to aggress upon you by doing certain things in a passive aggressive kind of way. So you can create situations where it's more likely they're mostly responsible for their actions, but you can create a situation where you can induce other people to do. This is a projective identification, where you induce other people to do certain things they ultimately is their responsibility to respond to that inducement or not, but still, anyway, so the Talion to what the analyst or the psychotherapist should be doing, according to Racker, and I think his principles should be applied really to any school of healing, of psychological healing, but is to respond to and understand that appeal, that whatever it is, the drive, that is, but not to respond in kind, not to keep the vicious cycle of action and reaction going, okay, and to take a step back, and that requires someone of particular insight, or just in a situation, advantageous situation, of being able to listen to someone and to understand them, and to be paid to do so, because that's what analysts and psychotherapists are paid to do, and then to create some new experience that's not. If the experience is so disjunct and it just doesn't compute for the patient, they can't understand it, then it's not as helpful as if they're able to be drawn out of their entrapment in this Talion law, back and forth, like for like responses, continually creating relationships, creating that just keep on keeping them trapped. So anyway, so my thesis and my recommendation, and this is in part inspired. I mean, I've thought about this before, but I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, in her recent responses to Paul Gosar and his attack upon her, essentially his imaginary attack, which is also very dangerous because it was public, and it was also, he's a political leader, and it creates it's just another incitement from the right wing to violence to its base. And so her response is breaking this Talion principle, okay, this law. This is why I'm having, sort of creating kind of a general framework. I'm using fancy words. I'm talking about an obscure psychoanalyst from 60, 70 years ago, and so forth and so on. But I am trying to create a general framework for understanding how she and other political leaders could create an opportunity for people to break out of this tendency to react in kind to excuse me, react in kind to or to reinforce the aggressive and destructive cycle of action reaction that we are descending in as a society. So this requires a reflection on it. So how can you not respond exactly in kind without, and this is what I said in the video about her talks, you don't necessarily turn the other cheek to the aggressive content of what's being said. You need to notice the aggressive content. You need to condemn it. You need to defend yourself against it. It's not a matter of laying yourself open to attack, and that's something that unfortunately the Democrats have a tendency to do, and the Democratic leadership in particular. It's not opening yourself to attack and allowing yourself to be attacked as being, but it's not also responding directly in kind and at the same level as the Republicans are doing and the neo-fascists, because they're trying to bring people, they're trying to keep both political discourse and also at a very low level of tit for tat, of Punch and Judy, like the doll, like the puppets in Punch and Judy, continually battering each other. Okay, and so this requires an understanding of the Talion law, understanding that it's not something that's going to go away, but also to take a step back from it and say, no, we want to be operating on a more general principles about having a society where everybody can live together and where we can work together, okay, and be a working group, okay. This is also something from a psychoanalyst or a psycho-object relations theorist named Bion, Wilfred Bion, talking about being a work group, and he was someone who looked at group psychology, and that it's the ideal in terms of how a group can be together is to be able to focus on a common goal and to discuss it and to work together to create solutions to either achieve this goal or to face a certain issue. This is something that our political leaders should be doing. They should be forming in the Bionian context, a work group, okay, and to be working together. And this requires, though, not avoiding and turning the cheek and ignoring attacks like Gosar's and like that come from people like, or but also, or like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert or Ted Cruz, and now the party, Donald Trump. They have become a party of I guess the word trolling is used, but it's become sort of a sort of special use. I'm trying to create a general idea of a theory that is about human behavior, about leadership, okay, political leadership, and how leaders, and in the mini context of the psychoanalysis, the patient and the analyst or therapist, the analyst or therapist is the leader to some degree, or should be leading, though not in the same sense as a political leader, but still they're working together, and they should create a working relationship where they can work on the issue. In this case, the patients. And I mean, it'd be great if the patient would lead themselves, but they're coming to someone who supposedly is helping facilitate them, their resolution of some issue for them. But the taking away from that mini context, in the broad context of our society, political leaders are there to work on and resolve real challenges we're facing. We're facing many, many real challenges. And so the right wing is trying to distract us and create this for the purpose of keeping people in this low, devolved state of anger and of resentment and of disgust and reactivity and propensity to act without thinking, and also propensity to use violence. And they are trying to get our society and keep our society, or push our society in that direction, because they don't have any solutions. Their patrons are telling them, you need to destroy the possibility of there being any progress toward social democracy and toward a green or social green, more public oriented climate transition that would change society fundamentally and quickly, which we need to be doing. And so they're being funded, and they're trying to undermine the fairly listless Democrats in their efforts to sort of be kind of address these things in a very half-hearted kind of way. So, and I'm not saying all the Democrats want to be half-hearted, but there are a lot of half-hearted Democrats in the leadership. So anyway, I'm offering these ideas as a way to create a generalized picture, even though they're very specific ideas, as I said, obscure from obscure sources, but they have, I think, a general applicability to creating the space. So another way to think about this is a word that's sometimes overused: the space, the mental space, the social space. Okay, that's what leadership is trying to do. Maybe I should make another video about using the word space as the operative metaphor, okay, for what I'm trying. But what Racker and what transcending this Talion law and creating creates space for people to think, and people to change direction, and to do things somewhat differently based on what they're thinking and how they're feeling in some authentic way. And so that is a goal that we need to be working toward. And I am using this example of what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did as a way that we can create some of this space. And it's not, leadership space. It's not per se about psychotherapy, though there's also a need for psychotherapy for many people who are involved in some of the pinnacles of U.S. politics, probably. But it's about a big social process, and political leaders are key to that process. So I'm sorry to have gone on so long. I hope you enjoyed the contents of this video. If you did, please like it. And if you're enjoying more generally the content on Politics 2100, please subscribe to the channel. And also, please, if you have specific comments about what I'm offering here, please share your comments below, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.